we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. Oh, the good times just begun. We know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life.
You know, I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up around farming. My grandfather was a farmer. He had a lot of cows. Believe it or not, he didn't have a lot of chickens. Didn't have any chickens when I was growing up. And that was about it, cows. He had a nice garden every year, him and my grandma. And I can remember my great aunt having a huge garden, huge. Like, I was talking to my husband about it a couple weeks ago, and when I think of a garden, I think of her garden, her huge garden that she had to have been like a 1/4 acre or more garden. And I remember thinking then how much work it was. I mean, I didn't have to do the work, but just going and watching her work, watching her can, watching her garden, helping shell beans, helping shell peas. And I didn't think anything about homesteading back then. Hey! Hey! Which reminds me now, as I'm older, that my kid probably doesn't think like this kid too a whole lot about homesteading. It's just life, right? Hey! These are some of our new layers that we got from McMurray Hatchery, and I'm really excited about them. They are tinted egg layers, and there's even a rooster in this batch. Right there, the little one. And they are our next generation of egg producers. So we are trying to take extra good care of them in this setup right now, and make sure they don't get eaten by the time they start laying eggs. Everett. The only bad thing about these chicken coops is that it's not easy to wear the baby and go inside with the baby on the back, but otherwise they're great. Now, growing up around farming makes you think a little bit differently. There are things that happen that you just, you know, are common, right? Like, it's common to be around livestock. It's common to think about where your food comes from. But for a lot of kids and for a lot of people in general, that's just not common anymore. If there's one thing I've learned during this whole pandemic, it's that people have forgotten what life really is like, and what it used to look like, and maybe what it should still look like. Hey! I'm not really the kind of person that likes to preach about how you should live and how you shouldn't live. But when we think about how people used to live back in the 1800s or even up into the 1940s. You know, my dad, I was talking to him the other day, and he was talking about how they had a huge half-acre garden that they lived off of when he was a kid, and he was born in the 40s. So it wasn't that long ago that we were still on the farm. When I say we, I mean us as a generation. But the average American farmer is between 65 and 70 years old. And there's not a whole lot of people around to take his place. So we see farming happening like big agriculture and Monsanto and companies stepping in because that's the easiest thing to do. We see these big companies taking control because there's no farmer left to fight. I know a lot of good farmers though. I know a lot of good farmers that are fighting the good fight. He's a good farmer. Polyface Farm, Joel Salton, is one of the most famous farmers, and he still shows up for your rights and fights for your rights and food freedom, while most of us aren't. I say most of us, and I include myself in it. We have been off the farm for way too long. When we bought this house, it sits on a half acre. It's in a wooded subdivision, so it's not real secluded, but it's not uncomfortably prevalent in the neighborhood either. But the last thing I thought about was homesteading on it. Since we moved here, the first time I planted a garden, I planted it, see this deck? I planted it right below this deck. Of course, this is all of our winter rye right now. It's a cover crop. And for years, we tried to grow stuff back here. Nothing would work. And this past year, a farmer friend of ours and another friend of ours actually said, why don't you just plant winter rye? And I'm like, isn't that a farmer crop? and the guy goes, aren't you like a homesteader? But I planted a little garden right here. Little. And I had to hoe the entire thing by hand because we didn't have a rototiller. We had nothing except a pickaxe and a hoe. And so I hoed the whole thing by hand, about killed myself doing it. And that year alone, I think I might have gotten about 5 peas. By peas, I mean just peas, not 5 pea plants. I couldn't find my potatoes because I actually had no idea that you were supposed to mound potatoes and get a potato fork and all those things. And my tomatoes fell over and died of blight. Yeah, it was a great experience. My next experience in gardening was a little bit better. I decided to garden in some pots, and we did some big 5-gallon buckets of different things, and they did actually a little better, believe it or not, because I wasn't having to hoe a row by hand. And I was able to move them around with the sun. As you can see from the previous video and now, this whole area back here is pretty shaded, and so we don't have a lot of sun in the back the whole day. Now we had sun in the front about half the amount of time that we have in the back, so I could move front and back when I needed to. It wasn't actually until a few years ago that I decided to put a garden in the front, and I didn't think my husband was going to let me do it, to be honest with you. But we didn't really think we were going to move in the next few years, and so we made this beautiful garden in the front, and it was such a great experimental time for me to experiment with the garden. And that led up to our current garden on a new piece of property that we are excited to show you and get started with in the future. It's still just a work in progress that we're trying to beat the rain and get it all plowed up is hard, but it's pretty massive. No, don't do that. So I got a taste of what it was like to have a garden, right? I got a taste of what it was like to have a garden while we lived here. We still currently live here, but we have a lot of projects that we're doing. But this year, as I've watched my husband lay out our garden, our new garden, it took me back to my great aunt's garden, and I wished I had pictures of her garden, because I keep trying to tell my husband like how big it was. And you know, when you're a kid, everything is more massive. But then we drove by there one day, her old house, recently, in the last 2 weeks, and it really was massive. Like, she doesn't live there anymore, and it was just as massive as I remember it being when looking at the land and remembering the perimeters of our garden. And I thought to myself, Why would I remember something like that? Why would I remember the perimeters of a garden that I probably only saw a few times every summer? And why would a garden like that make such a big impact on me? I feel like I have to go back and forth between these coops 100 times to feed and water everything. And I'll be really glad when our garden and our chickens and our house is all on the same property. I have so much echinacea coming back this year. I'm so excited. I thought we killed it all. There's more down there. And yes, we're the people who leave the pretty weeds because, well, they're pretty. Look, Everett, there's a caterpillar. Everett hates caterpillars, don't you? Everett, there's a caterpillar. Did you see it? He's like, ooh, get it away from me. Look, there's another one. I think back to when my dad had a smaller garden on the property we rented a few counties over, and I remember one year helping him till, and he'll tell you this story over and over again. And it's the first time I ever ran the tiller, and I was so excited because there was something inside of me that was really interested in gardening. But I hit a nest of rabbits and it scarred me for life. Well, it scarred me for life up until a few years ago. And I killed so many baby bunnies during that process. And I told him, I said, I'm never doing it again. I'm never doing it again. But I watched him and I paid attention to him as he gardened. And I remember him saying things like, you know, I would grow more food if we had more time to preserve it and keep it and can it. And, you know, back then I didn't think about learning that stuff. I thought, this is adult work, you know? Adults do this, kids don't do this. And so my mindset was already that of most American kids, the standard American child, that hard work was adult work. We haven't raised our kids like that. We've raised our kids to work hard, even at their age. Not quite this one yet, but he'll be the same way. I think, though, that I remember gardening vividly. Like there are certain memories I don't have as a child. Things that my mom will say, don't you remember this? And I'll say no. But I can remember the garden. I can remember my aunt's garden. And I can vaguely remember my grandma's garden that she had on the property she was on before they moved to their current house. And that was years and years ago. I remember going to garden nursery centers as a kid with my grandma. Couldn't remember where they were, but I remember going. And of course, I have other memories too as a kid. But my favorite memories are probably on the farm and remembering the gardening things and music. I was always into music, songwriting and singing, and I was in my dad's little band, and you know, that was always a fun highlight. Fast forwarding to now, I think those memories stuck with me because maybe, just maybe, I knew, or God knew, that sometime in the future I was gonna have to get back on the farm. instinctually, humans have an instinct, okay? Instinctually, we know that we should be growing our own food, raising our own meat, or learning how to hunt or forage. We know this instinctually. When we start learning things, it's new to us, but it's not new to the generations before us. Now, it might be, depending on how old you are. You know, if you're younger than me, maybe your grandparents didn't garden. Maybe your grandparents didn't can and preserve food. Mine did. My great aunt did more than my grandma that I remember. But when we start getting our hands in the dirt, and we start making bread, and we start sewing clothes, and we start preserving our own food, there's something inside of us that says, this is what I was made to do. Humans by nature have an instinct to survive, but somehow we've gotten away from surviving on our own and have decided that it's time for someone else to keep us alive. We've gotten away from the farm. We've gotten away from the homestead. We've gotten away from the mindset that we can provide for ourselves. You know, I've heard people consistently post and say that most of us couldn't survive. That's why big farming exists. That's why big pharmaceutical companies exist. That's why all these things exist. And that's actually not true. You know, someone argued the other day that, well, we would all homestead and farm if we could afford it, but that's not how life is now. And my argument is that life didn't change just because the years come and go. Life changed because we changed as humans. You know, we quickly decided that we wanted both spouses in the house to work and to send the kids to school, which meant we didn't have time to garden and can, though some people still made that exception. We decided that we were in a safe place after the wars were over. The government was doing a really good job at taking care of us, which meant that we now had time to live the American dream. We now had time to work more and play more because we worked more, because we had more money. And we bought bigger houses, and we traded big, large open fields and yards for small postage stamps and subdivisions. We built more houses with less property. We have gotten rid of fields and livestock grazing areas. Farmers have had to sell off land because they couldn't afford it anymore, and because the generation after them didn't really care about farming. And so here we are in a predicament because we've gotten off the farm where we have food shortages, and more than anything, we're building the immune system with sticks in the mouth. More than anything, we have forgotten life skills. If we had to survive, most of us wouldn't know how. And guess who we'd be going to? We'd be going to the farmer or the homesteader up the road from us to ask them, how do I grow my own food? How do I provide for my own family? And then there's other people who wouldn't ask at all, and they just try to take. But we're raising our boys to be hard workers that don't eat sticks. And we're doing that because we know it's important, not just now, but 20 years from now, when they start thinking about their own families and their own lives and how they can provide for them. And they won't be in a situation where they feel hopeless. And that's what we're seeing a lot of right now, are people who feel hopeless, or at least during the pandemic we felt like that. And I don't know what I'm trying to get at, except I really think we just need to get back to the farm. We all have these natural instincts. Maybe it's time for us to listen to them. Fame and fortune goes away. Your job could be taken away from you in a heartbeat. Your health isn't promised to you. But skills don't die until the generation that knew them dies with them. And so what I guess I'm saying is, let's be that generation that doesn't let them die. So thanks for watching my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching other people's YouTube channels. Thanks for growing with us and learning with us and teaching with us. Because I think a lot of us think the same way. We don't want to die without the skills being passed on to people. Our kids, even our parents. Some of us are even teaching our parents these skills. Because one day, if it's this bad during a virus, one day it might be even worse during something else in our children or our grandchildren's generations. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the person who sits back and thinks, gosh, I wish I would have taught them